of Around the Table. It's our podcast where we like to discuss some pretty big issues, and today we're going to be looking at whether faith and politics should mix, and if so, how?
Yeah, and quite a delicate subject, I think, especially in this general election year. But that's what we want to do in this podcast, challenge some of the big questions, try and offer some answers, and if we can't offer the right answers, certainly start a conversation. And so you notice we're joined by another guest. Great to have Dom Cadman here. Dom is a good friend of mine. We're godparents to each other kids, but Dom is also a member of the Lib Dem party up in Oldham. You stood for election at the local elections.
Yes, yeah.
Didn't quite get in, but you're slowly narrowing the margins.
Exactly.
So great to have you here. We went for someone outside of Bramwell so that we didn't cause kind of controversy, but great to have you here as we think about the faith and politics mix.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
So politics can be quite divisive at the best of times.
Yes.
What interests you in it?
I think for me, politics is around influencing change, and I guess I think for me, it's always been something of a passion. I think trying to look at the world and how we live in it and the community, and seeing if we can't influence that in some small way, and I think that's the attractiveness to it for me.
Can you go a single day without talking or thinking about politics?
Talking, yes. Thinking, no. I think for me, it's sort of the way I guess wired. I guess it's the way I've been brought up. It's one of those sort of passions that each of us have, sort of things which get us out of bed in the morning or interest us. And that's why it's always got on my mind, but I'm aware that some friends start glazing over after the bit and talk about it too much, so we have to sort of that sweet spot between talking about it and maybe thinking about it a bit more. So,
yeah, I think when we go and have meals together, we do have to limit the amount of times we talk about politics.
Yes.
Set a little timer.
Yeah. Or the wives start just doing that after a while.
Yeah. So you're a practicing Christian?
Yes, I am.
You go to Audacious Church,
in
Manchester?
Yeah, North Campus, which is based in Bury.
Okay. And have you been a Christian all your life, or was there a kind of an important moment in life?
I think for me, I've always been a Christian, and I think some people have these amazing stories of sort of coming to faith themselves, and that's amazing. I think for me, I've always been brought up in a CAV church from a very young age, and we had a time in the States. I think that's probably the closest I get where we didn't go to church, so and not for lack of trying. Mum tried lots of different churches and denominations, and it just didn't work out, and I really miss that sort of going to church and that sort of that stability that it kind of gave me. And so when I had the option, when I went to university, I really made sure concerted effort to go to churches and keep going as well, and raise my now child in the church as well. So that's quite important to me.
Yeah. So obviously your faith is quite important to you and has been for a long time. Do you ever find that your faith clashes with your interest in politics, or do you find that your values align, or is that difficult?
I think I never find interest in politics clashing. I think sometimes on topics or things, or dare I say, when you come across people in politics who aren't Christian, their approach to resolving issues or approach to driving policy, I would clash with my personal style, my beliefs. But no, I wouldn't say it clashes with politics, and I think. Chat later on about different verses or different things. Sort of, I sort of think drive us into being interested in politics, or at least engaged. I think it's sort of quite strong throughout that's what we have to do. And being engaged.
So you said politics is about kind of making change, positive change.
Yes. Yeah.
So in your involvement with politics, would you say your faith is informing the change you're trying to bring about?
I would say that. Yeah. I think it all comes back to. Again, it's very hard not to sort of slip into Lib Dem mode, but I mean, one thing I do like at the minute, and other parties are available, be very clear. But one of the things that Lib Dem is about a fairer society, and I think that's actually for all the sort of respectfully bombastic talking about Brexit or this and all these big topics,
big divisive topics that everyone talks about.
Yeah, actually taking a step back and actually what is fair, or what do we as a society want to portray? And I would argue that some things that are very front page in the news at the minute are not fair to those involved in it, and I would not reflect sort of the values of Christians. And we're talking Christians, actually, what do we want to do in day to day, and how do we want to treat people, and I think that's a really important thing, and something I've sort of latched onto recently, sort of thinking about Christian and sort of my politics and what drives that and how they sort of do come together.
Do you ever find you come up against people who would say politics and faith absolutely shouldn't mix, and they shouldn't? I mean, people say that that's one thing you shouldn't bring up at parties is politics and religion, right? To be honest. So do you ever find that you come up against that?
Yeah, I mean, a terrible party talking about politics. I mean, it shows how the party's going.
I would disagree. I love talking about politics.
It loves a good debate.
No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things. It's the whole thing. We sort of come up, quite an Americanism of, the divide of church and state. I think there's a key thing that I feel very strongly about, saying actually, it's back to the fairness thing, that not every person is a Christian, and therefore for me to impose that upon them is not something I align with. And I guess when you sort of talk about like a centrist party like Lib Dems, that's sort of why I've sort of landed in that sort of camp, is because I respect the right for people to have their own views, and I will defend their right to worship or practice of faith, whatever they believe in. And that works the other way for me as well, that I get to be a practicing Christian and I respect that. And I think when we start to encroach upon that and start influencing laws on everybody that they don't subscribe to, that becomes problematic. And it's difficult. It's not something I necessarily every time align on the same thing in my head, but that's I guess how I would typify that.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Yeah, I think Jesus said, didn't he, love one another as I have loved you. And you take that phrase of, okay, we're called and commissioned to love other people. Yeah. He doesn't say love the people that live around you and that's it. He doesn't say love the people that you like. He doesn't say just love the people that you agree with. He just says love one another as I have loved you. There's no end point to that loving one another. And then he demonstrates what that love looks like by getting down on his hands and knees and washing his disciples' feet, basically saying that what that love looks like is serving people. And I guess that's really what's at the heart of politics, especially politics that's wanting to make a change. It's about being there on the ground, making change happen, serving everyone to make, as you seem to be suggesting, the world a fairer place for everyone. Yeah. Would you say politics in 21st century Britain is living up to that standard?
No. Sure, no, and I think actually point. I think it's let's take it on local politics. I think that's a bit easier, more palatable.
That's a really important point, actually, isn't it? There's two levels of politics these days, isn't there? There's national government, which seems to make massive decisions that's in the news all the time. That is it really affecting daily life apart from tax of every single individual in the country? And then there's local politics, which actually has a real impact on daily life.
Impacts, and I think it's easy to take at that level, because I think when you start talking about an MP's salary and where they're based and the decision they're making and dare I say the ability to maybe not make the best decisions or be led astray in certain regards, I think if you take it local politics, I mean that still exists, but when you look at the salaries of what you're getting compensated and what you controls you've got, I think you have to be doing that really, from all parties, from a position of wanting to change things in that local level, so I said there's still nastiness and unpleasant things that go on at local level, but I think it's a lesser extent, and you sort of see that in you mentioned that based up in Oldham, and you see that there is still collaboration, and we had the local election results the other week, and there was commiserations from all parties to those who lost seats. It's unpleasant to see people, particularly, as is always the case, it's some people have done a very good job for many years for whatever party they voted for and been voted out in some times just on the whim or sort of going with the political will, and actually very good councillors lost their seats through no fault of their own, and so sometimes it's very hard, I think, at local level, because you're trying to do a good job.
Local level doesn't seem to have the newspaper readability that national politics seems to have.
Not quite the same level drama, is it really?
And maybe that's where politics has got a bad name.
Maybe so. But it's nice that you've got the support of other parties as well, and you've kind of got that common goal of trying to make a difference, and that's ultimately what politics comes down to, isn't it, really?
No, exactly, because like I say, it does have a big impact what you're talking about, and and people are generally trying to influence and change their community because they live there, and I think that's quite telling. Whereas respectfully to all MPs, they do a very hard job, but sometimes I would argue they spend more of the time down in London because that's what their job requires. And do they lose a bit of that local constituency engagement? I would say they do, and so I think that's why local politics interests me. Going to London is not necessarily on the cards.
Can't blame you for that. Yeah.
So, would you say to the average person, or even just to the kind of average Christian, they kind of have no perception of leadership, they don't want to be on a ballot paper, should they get involved in politics? Should they even talk about politics?
I think, and sort of reflecting on this, and there was, and I think maybe we'll attach Bible verse afterwards rather than me misquoting. There was a few verses sort of floating in my head that sort of came to me, but it's always the talk, that sort of Jesus sort of came to and said, we've got to engage, we've got to pay our taxes, we've got to engage in that, and actually look at what Jesus was doing was extremely radical, but it was subverting or changing the politics at the time. And I guess he stops very much shy of anarchism. He sort of says, this we must engage and pay our taxes and work with that. So I think there's always an obligation to be involved in politics, and that, like I said, varies from different people. My wife is not political at all, but she will always go out and vote, and she will sometimes come to me, not for me to take a steer, and I'll never tell her to vote for a party, but it will always be a case of what are we voting for on this, or what's that, because there's no interest to her per se on politics, but I think there is an expectation that we're all very lucky to have a vote.
Yeah.
We should always go and exercise that, and I would argue, people say, I don't know where to get information or who to vote for, and I think I would always sort of challenge people, back to the party. If people say that in passing at a party, I always say, if you can spend an hour, once a year, whenever the next local or general, to spend some time and look at it, I think you'll feel a lot more engaged with what's going on, and you can then have the right then to moan about if you don't like the result. I think when people sort of sit back and go, it's all the same party, all the same politics, I say you have to really disagree with you on that, because there is so much choice to vote on, and you really have to look at the local candidates and choose.
You've kind of started to ask our next question of how to do it.
Yeah,
I think you've picked up on a really important point there, in that people should do some homework when they come to vote. And actually, you're also talking about people should talk about politics. There should be a dialogue going on. We seem to live in a world where actually dialogue, especially in the world of politics, doesn't happen anymore. Because actually people just scream at each other.
I was going to say, it just turns into arguments, doesn't it? And that gets you nowhere.
So say we've got 2 Labour voters, 2 Conservative voters, 2 Lib Dem voters in a room, and they're arguing about, or trying to have a discussion about politics. Let's say Brexit has come into the room. Not asking for opinion, but what sort of values should they be taking into that room to have that discussion?
I think it's love your neighbour, isn't it? Or the other one I quite like is Timothy. Is it not to be quarrelsome, or to and again, I wish I could always remember the verses, but I think it's that sort of thing of honouring, respecting, and loving your neighbour, and also not being quarrelsome for quarrelsome's sake. And I think it's, if you go into a room respecting people, taking on their views, and also trying to, ultimately you're in politics, you're quite competitive. You're not. I don't believe you win an argument by screaming, shouting at someone. You win it by outmanoeuvring them or coming back to points they just can't argue. But if you go into a room and you don't respect people and treat them respectfully, then you're not going to influence or change their opinion on certain topics. Or at least, if you're not going to convince people, at least they're going to stop and think, actually, I can see where they're coming from, I don't agree with that, but okay, I'm in a different place than I was before. And ultimately, you're never going to achieve anything. Go back to local politics. You're not working with millions of pounds of budgets, and your donors behind you talking about in Oldham's case 60 councillors sitting around a room going, how are we going to sort this problem out? And come up with a pragmatic solution. And so if you go in a room screaming, shouting every time, then that's not going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting actually that you pick up on the fact that actually we all have, going back to your wife's not particularly political, but equally there is that responsibility then, and I think as Christians, or to be honest, as a person of any faith or even no faith, we do have a responsibility to vote. And in a way, as a Christian, you're, maybe your way of getting involved with politics might just be to vote, right? Not everyone's going to be a leader in that sense, but you can still be involved, and I think that's quite important that you picked up on that, really.
And I think it's just being engaged. It's the things we sort of take for granted. Children go to school. The P word, potholes, or whatever that might be. Drains, or other big topics like that. But people experience politics every day, whether they realise it or not, and they have a power to change that. And that's either engaging on writing letters to councillors or your MPs. It's either voting or taking more proactive views. And actually, I was always taught that local politics start. If you want to be involved in politics, you actually start on school boards. That's a really good place to start, because that, being involved in your school and making sure the schools are running efficiently and sort of holding good values and that's a really good place to start. And of course, being local councillors as well. There's lots of different ways to get involved, but I think actually your point is we are all subject to politics every day on a macro level, as same on the micro.
So you've talked about voting. You've talked about joining governing boards, getting involved in kind of local politics in terms of discussions and doing your research and things. Is there practical action that's involved in politics as well? So would you say, because you talked about creating change and serving the community, so would you say actually on a very basic level, going out and doing litter picking or going out and caring for the local park to going out and just caring for your neighbours and trying to maybe, when we have a national holiday, whenever that might next be, organising a street party, would you say on a really basic level that's politics in itself?
You get in what you put in, and I should say for above board, you've not paid me for what comes out next. But I mean, when you look at your church, people say, we're wonderful. We had, we've got fantastic facilities at this church, and it's amazing every time we come and see it. And so, but there is an argument. But not every church looks like this. Not every church has the facilities here. And I remember growing up in a church where, thinking, we were saving for a disabled ramp for about 15 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it was that sort of thing, if only we get the money. And we were quite, let's be clear, quite an affluent part of Cambridgeshire, and
it's beautiful to drive through.
Yeah, it's quite a nice area, I quite like it. But the point I'm trying to make there is actually that, there was money, respectfully, in that community that we could have paid for that within a year. And so it comes back to, we have the influence power to change. I'm now in a Pentecostal church, and we've spoken about the idea of tithing and that sort of thing. I do. I would say religiously, that's not quite the right word, but but that idea of if you want your church to change, if you want your church to have a better community group for your children, or better activities, or repair the leak in the roof or whatever, the power sits in that community to do that. And so in the same way we can influence our church and drive the church in a positive way, it's the same way in politics. If you want to see that pothole repaired, you can do something about it. If you want to see...
Don't go out and repair the pothole.
Not personally. But you can
there is that
change.
temptation, isn't there, that someone else will do it.
Exactly.
And then but then everyone's going to think that, and then nothing will change.
Yeah. And I think it comes back to that whole message you mentioned before about, aren't Jesus said to serve other people? And so I think as a Christian that should be our sort of first port of call. And again, it doesn't have to make people feel guilty or to right, I'm going to go run for MP. It's to say there's levels of things you can do, and everyone's got different abilities and skill sets and things they can offer. And if that means that you feel, and for me it's quite that's why I do local politics. At least every year I go, okay, I didn't get elected, but I did my bit, and I feel like I've ticked the box and I've tried to change that. And that's what I need personally for me. But other people might be, I drop leaflets once a year, and I've done my bit, and I feel better, or I've done something small that means that they know they've influenced things in a small way, and that's good enough for them. So
definitely.
Brilliant. So if you had one quote or one kind of Bible verse or something that inspires you that you would want to offer to somebody else, what would it be?
I think to go back to what I said before, two things. One is from Timothy about not being quarrelsome. I think when you look at like where we've come from in terms of recent votes and that, Brexit and Scottish independence, in our sort of national sort of story recently, its ability to talk through things civilly, and then also most importantly come back around in a sort of reconcile and move forward from that. And I think that's something we need to be better at. And then it goes back to what I said about fair society and being fairer to each other. And we've got some amazing institutions we've created in this country, Methodism, Anglicanism, and those sort of denominations and faith. Fantastic when you look at it and peel back the layers. It's loving and serving God, but it's also it's treating people with respect. And you go back to Cadbury, that was set up by Quakers and all those sort of institutions like that.
It's still in that area of Birmingham. You still can't buy an alcoholic drink. There are still no pubs in that area.
I hadn't realised that.
So I think it's those sort of things I would people would take away, maybe have to think about, and see what that means to them.
So I suppose in this general election year, I keep saying I got in trouble on Sunday for saying that. I guess the task of the Christian is actually to be encouraging people to talk about it, to debate about it, to engage with it, but in a loving, caring, civilised way.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said before around a bit of homework. I think it's understanding what is important to you and to your family, and looking at your personal circumstances. It's doing a bit of homework on what the parties are standing for, and also understanding our system as well. I think it's important to say, I won't vote for the Greens or whoever it is you want to vote for because they're a small party, and it's actually no. But you've got to look at the way our system's set up, and you vote for an MP. And then it's not like a presidential US system where you vote for a president and everything sort of falls in behind them. It's you vote for your conscience, who you want to vote for, and your vote does count. And actually, the thing I would say back to making sure you register to vote or can vote. The turnout in my ward the other week was only 33%. So any other person you could stand if you wanted with a good party, as long as you got everyone behind you, and that 70%, you could have walked the election. And it comes back to that thing of it really, your vote does matter. So
I suppose as Christians, when we sit down with manifestos in one hand, we call that to sit down with the Bible in the other and say, actually, where are these matching up? Because we're constantly praying through the Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come. So which manifesto, both locally and nationally, is going to lead us closer to our nation, our community, looking more like kingdom of God.
And I do actually believe that because I'm very clear on this that sort of separation of my church and state in terms of how I approach politics. And I do believe that a natural position for most Christians would be a floating voter, because I think actually that when you get into party politics, there is a possibility you sort of go, our party is the absolute best, and I that I really do strain against that, because it's actually I am a paid up member and I believe in Lib Dems, and that's personal to me. But I think most Christians would put themselves in the camp of a floating voter, but in that comes responsibility of not having prejudices from who your dad voted for, or who your mum voted for, or who your husband votes for, your wife. It's making sure you're taking the time to say what is my faith directing me and who directs me to vote for. And the key thing is to vote, or at least go and scribble on the voting card. You still exercise the right to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Oh, thank you so much for coming to join us.
Pleasure.
I really enjoyed having you here. It's been really interesting topic.
Faith and politics, should it mix? Where are you sitting now, Jenny?
I think that it definitely has its part to play, doesn't it, politics? I think we were talking the other day about community, weren't we? And I think if you have a good faith behind you and that feeds into your policies, and then that should create community. I think they all fit together and tessellate together. And I think it shouldn't, you shouldn't be pushing your faith down other people's throats in that sense, like you've mentioned before. We want to be respectful of other people, but I do think as Christians, it affects every aspect of our life. And you said you can't get away from politics. It's that also affects us. So I would say yes, but I know there are people who'd say no. What do you think?
I'm fully signed up to Christians should get involved in politics, because we've got the manifesto that is better than all the others. It's called the Bible. It's called God's vision for the world. Sorry if that's insulting for you. But I want to see our community thrive. I want to see individuals thrive. And I think the best person to help us do that is God. Yeah. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life in all its fullness. So the candidate that enables an individual to thrive is going to get my vote. But equally, I want to get my hands dirty and get involved as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. Brilliant.
Slightly longer episode today.
Yeah, it was a bit. But it was always going to be, wasn't it, with politics?
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Tom, for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Excellent. Brilliant. So we're back next Monday with another episode, and there won't be a guest sat in the room. It's just you and me, I think, next week.
I think it is, yeah.
Excellent.
Brilliant.
Thanks. Take care.